our first ever virtual community update. And we're going to talk about all of the areas of our work and also launch a new exciting area today. Before we get started, I want to just first acknowledge a few things about our Zoom. We are going to screen share, so there will be a presentation on the screen. We have ASL interpretation, so we are going to pin our ASL interpreters to the screen, as well as the person who's presenting. For anyone who's interested in asking questions throughout the session, we do have Q&A available after every section in the PowerPoint. And so we'll be taking at least 2 questions every time. And there's going to be several presenters. So you're going to get to hear from a bunch of different staff members about all the great work that they're doing. So we are going to get started shortly. Also, this is being live streamed. So we're excited to do that. That's the first time we're doing that. And we are recording so that this video will be on our YouTube page after we are done with today's session. So we are going to get started. My name is Linda Tajani. I am the chair and executive director for the New York City Commission on Racial Equity. I'm so excited to have you all on the line. Just a quick overview of who we have. We have several community partners on the line with us today. The Commission on Racial Equity is run by 15 commissioners, including myself, and 13 staff members. We have all of our staff on the line today, and we have a few commissioners joining us today. So thank you to everyone for taking time out. We also have some racial equity planners, which are city staff from across 45 city agencies that worked diligently on their racial equity plan, on the first ever racial equity plan. So thank you all for being with us today. And we have supporters and partners on different projects and racial equity champions who are joining in to this work to listen in. So we're going to put up our screen share. And I'm going to look to Kayla to begin sharing. Okay. And then Kayla, if you wouldn't mind pinning our ASL interpreters as well.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. All right, so welcome to the commission, everyone. Before we get started, again, I just want to note we actually have a big crowd with us today. We have 292 people are registered to join us today. So we're going to do our best to make sure that we get in all the questions. But if we don't, we will be offering an opportunity at the end of the session to fill out a quick evaluation form where you can ask any additional question. Can we go to the next slide? So before we get started, we wanted to uplift community agreements that we use both in our conversations, in person and virtual, and in our day-to-day work at CORE. So the chat is enabled for you to talk directly with the host and co-host. We would love for you to learn these community agreements, adapt them to your community, but we also wanted to make sure that you know all the ways in which we try and help facilitate an inclusive, respectful, and empowering community conversation. So making I statements, taking space and making space, being mindful of the gap between what we mean and what we say, and sometimes how it lands. Recognizing that we don't have to agree on everything, but that we do want to work together towards change, and then having one mic, so being able to listen to each other and signal to speak or ask questions. Again, you can use the chat to ask questions, and we do have dedicated time for that. Next slide. So in a quick overview of CORE's mandate, I know many of you know what we do and who we are, but we just want to uplift what are the reasons why the public in November of 2022 voted us in. So we have 5 core mandates: to identify and propose community equity priorities, to track and publicly report on agency and citywide compliance with racial equity planning processes, to respond to the requests of the speaker and of council and its committees regarding racial equity concerns, to review and publicly comment on new citywide racial equity plans. I believe many of you know these are the plans we are still waiting on. And we'll talk a little bit later on about our lawsuit against the mayor to release these plans. And the last is to receive complaints about agency conduct that may have the effect of exacerbating racial equity disparities and make recommendations to agencies to address such disparities. These 5 charter mandates really began the work that CORE is set out to do permanently in New York City. We are an independent commission, which means we do not report to the mayor or the speaker, but rather the people of New York City. And our work is to hold New York City government accountable to advancing racial equity and to increasing community voice in government decision-making. So when we say advance racial equity, we mean in the day-to-day work of government operations, from our payment processes, to our contracts, to our service delivery, to our hiring. Everything that government does should be done with an equitable lens. And our job is to do everything that we can to partner with New Yorkers to push government in the right direction and make sure that they are advancing racial equity, and to ensure that community voices are informing and are at the table for government decision making. Before we move forward, I also want to just uplift that in October of 2024, CORE was given 2 more mandates, and that's Local Law 91 and 92. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next few slides when we talk about community engagement. And Local Law 91 and 92 are historic in that this is about establishing a New York City study on reparations and creating a citywide plan for truth, healing, and reconciliation. So our mandate is growing, and we're excited to do that. And to date, we have worked with and have heard back from over 8,000 New Yorkers on what government needs to do to ensure that New Yorkers are able to thrive. We are no longer just wanting to survive. We want our people to thrive. And so here at the Commission on Racial Equity, we focus on not just being able to work with all New Yorkers, but be able to shine a light and address the concerns of New Yorkers, particularly communities harmed by racism and social injustice. Let's go to the next slide. So today we're going to talk about our new area of work, which is the citywide community equity priority indicators. We're going to share a little bit about our second engagement cycle, which we are currently in. We're going to talk to you about the work that we do with council and our lawsuit against the mayor of New York. And then we're going to invite you to stay involved and hear what's next. So before I move on, I just also want to thank just from the deepest parts of my heart, this team at CORE. We started off very small. We are a team of 13 with a citywide mandate. And we're a team of 15 commissioners with a citywide mandate. So we are doing the work to ensure that New Yorkers across the city are being heard as a very small office. And the team has worked extremely hard, and we would not have been able to get to this point and have this virtual share out if it was not for them and their work. So I just wanted to say thank you to the CORE team. And also note that today's briefing actually fulfills a request that comes from community. When we launched CORE in October of 2023, community said, we want updates as often as you can about all of the work that you're doing. And so today actually starts a new area of work, making sure that our members in the CORE community, regardless of how you show up, whether it is a commissioner, a staff, a government employee, a community partner, a youth leader, that you are getting updates from CORE and that you are able to participate and help inform the work that we are doing. And so with that, I am excited to turn it over to our first presenters, which is Maya Williams and Stella Chong, and they are going to talk about citywide community equity priorities. Before we move to the next slide, we have had a lot of people just join. So again, Linda Tajani, Chair and Executive Director. I go by she, her, they, them, or my name, Linda. And we are getting ready to get started. If you've missed the first part, please note that this video is being recorded, will be up on YouTube, and we will work to make sure that the chat function is enabled so that you can reach the host and co-host. Thank you so much, and I turn it over to Maya.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maya Williams, pronoun she, her. I am the Director of Research and Policy here at the Commission. If you can go to the next slide, Kayla. So this first slide titled Citywide Community Equity Priority Indicators is really in reflection of our first mandate in response to being able to propose community equity priorities, which you'll hear us talk about throughout this, and really mostly we'll be saying CEPs, sort of short for community equity priorities. But CORE is mandated to propose both community equity priorities and outcome indicators for possible inclusion in the city and agency racial equity plans. Both the CEPs and outcome indicators, in addition to all of the work that CORE does, is led by community input being the foundation of all of our work, recognizing that those with lived experiences should be leading and guiding the advancement of equity, and we stay committed to that, both through organizing and engagement. Community has shared with us what is relevant to their well-being. And as Linda mentioned previously, in 2024, 18 CEPs were finalized. Today, we are releasing 3 outcome indicators, which are really going to be able to track the city's progress in implementing these CEPs. The Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice is also mandated to release outcome indicators within the racial equity planning process. Those are separate charter requirements outside of CORE. But to date, again, this legal obligation has not been met, and the release of the racial equity plans have not been fulfilled. So in this work that we're releasing today, we just like to publicly acknowledge that we recommend the city, as well as the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, use these indicators as a part of their legal obligation. So let's get into it. Our community outcome indicators should be quantifiable measures of any characteristics or conditions of people, institutions, systems, or processes that change over time. We are looking to measure change throughout government operations, and they should be specific, measurable, using consistently publicly released data. So we want to be able to track something that data has been released in response to show us what is happening throughout the city, but they also should be disaggregated in the ways in which is broken down by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability. Now, typically you'll see indicators that measure an agency's performance or that recognize what services are available. Some indicators that most of us are familiar with shows like what our city or what an organization is doing, but not how well the city is doing it. You also don't normally see indicators that capture the public's feedback, and that's something that CORE finds itself being unique in a unique position to do, and it is a process that is new to the city. So our indicators, again, really want to measure structural change throughout government operations, really wanting to assess the city's overall progress towards racial equity and being able to address disparities across several demographics. We've done this work with community, but also with guidance from other city agencies, as well as in response to research from other existing city indicators and frameworks, so like the mayor's management report and other models from other cities who are doing this racial equity work. Our indicator language and definitions went through several drafts and revisions. So we're very excited today to just be able to release them, be in conversation with you. They are up on our website. So we just ask that after this presentation, spend some time with it, send us questions that you may have. But we really just want to thank all of those who have collaborated with us to be able to release this product, including our research consultants, core commissioners, and the full team, as well as those who have supported in other city agencies. And I will pass it off to Stella with the next slide.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Stella Chong. I hope you can hear me. And so picking up from where Maya just left off, CORE will begin tracking changes in equity with the three outcome indicators that you can see here on the screen. And each of these indicators, they align with the New York City Charter's three fundamental values, which you can find on our website. And they also align with publicly available data that are released annually. And so for the first indicator on city workforce leadership, CORE defines that as being the demographic composition of city workforce leadership by race, ethnicity, gender, age, and disability compared to the overall New York City workforce. For the second indicator, we have that on the cost of living, and we define that as the percentage of the population of New Yorkers who are receiving income under the true cost of living, TCOL, by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability. And for the last indicator on housing and business ownership, we have two components. The first component being the proportion of New York City residents with home ownership compared to the general New York City population by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability. The second component being the proportion of New York City residents with business ownership, defined as either self-employed, professional practice, or farm, compared to the general New York City population by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability. And you'll notice that each indicator does not suggest a direction. That is an expected increase or decrease of progress, despite the fact that CORE's overall mission is to track and advance equity. And you may be wondering why. The reason is really because this is the first time that we are measuring progress with these indicators, which means these are baseline results. However, we would like to stress that for future results, we would like the results to align with what community members have advocated for, whether that being an increase or decrease in any of the indicators. Again, our ultimate goal is to see change that is a reduction in disparities of outcomes among community members who are experiencing racism and social injustice. Next slide, please. And again, just as Maya had mentioned earlier, we developed these indicators in response to community input. So on this slide, we want to uplift and highlight what we heard during the second engagement cycle from community members about potential CEP indicators. For the first indicator on city workforce leadership, we heard from a community member who pointed out that they would like to see us track the percentage of government roles filled by individuals from underrepresented groups and have that tracked and compared year after year. For the cost of living, we heard from another community member saying that they would like us to track what percentage of income is left over after essential needs, including rent, utilities, and groceries. And as for the third indicator, we heard from community members that they would like us to see the tracking of progress on local home ownership and rentership. And these community suggestions, they really support our beginning work on indicators and indicate that CORE is indeed on the right track in developing indicators and really speak for what communities have been voicing and continue to voice out. So next slide. Thank you.
So, beginning with the first indicator, city workforce leadership, communities have shared with us in our engagement cycles that they would like to see an increase in the population of city leadership and really wanting that population to reflect the ways in which they identify across demographics, but also being leaders who can relate to their lived experiences of people facing inequities. So, you'll notice on the right of the screen, there's a quote that came directly from a community member in Brooklyn, sharing how they would like to see leaders and policymakers really representing all races and genders and making sure that their voices are heard. In response to what community has shared with us, we will begin tracking the demographic composition of city workforce leadership by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability status compared to the general city government workforce. So the framing of city government, city workforce leadership, we just like to share with folks that we, in that definition, are measuring people who are in manager roles, administrator roles, policymakers, and those who are who are community board members. So all of these people really play a role in crafting and leading policy, as well as developing programs across the city and at neighborhood levels. We made the decision to include community board members in this measure because we acknowledge the importance of boards throughout our neighborhoods. We also recognize that it is a first place where community members are able to share their concerns and their priorities. And it's also a resource where community members are able to shape and get updates on policies, budgets, and plans. And they really have a say in that, right? So we want to also make sure that we're tracking that demographic composition within this measure. And if you can go to the next slide, Kayla. So at the top, we reiterated that indicators must be measurable, right, with consistent publicly available data. So we have went across just to see like where these demographic compositions are released publicly, and they're released annually, both through the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, also known as DCAS, Equity NYC, and then Borough President demographic reports that releases the demographic composition of community boards. The Conflict of Interest Board also releases some information about policymakers, but they don't collect the demographics of those. So just want to recognize that there are some limitations with this data in its inconsistency of certain things that are not released, but also in disaggregation, which we'll share as we walk through this. So the first graph to your left, titled City Workforce Leadership, it shows the overall city workforce being racially and ethnically diverse. But then you'll notice in the blue bars, which is showing the reflection of city leadership, you'll notice that there are some underrepresentation in administrators and managers. So this data comes directly from Equity NYC. They measure city leadership as folks who are in administrator and manager roles, right? So not the full composition that CORE would like to see. But you'll notice the underrepresentation in these positions when it comes to folks who identify as Black, Latinx, Native American, and young adults under 30 years old who are underrepresented in these roles. And then to your right, you'll see two graphs, one titled Queens and the other titled Brooklyn. When you have the time to go on our website, we do have these graphs for every community board, but just for the purpose of this presentation today, we're sharing the data that is collected from the Borough President demographic reports on the Borough of Queens and Brooklyn. So you'll notice at the top graph, that is the Queens demographics for community boards. We see some diversity there, but there are underrepresentation of board members who identify as Asian, Latinx, female, immigrants, individuals with disabilities, right? And we wanted to compare this with the overall general composition of the community members in the neighborhood of Queens. So how are they being reflected in these board member positions? Then the graph for Brooklyn. Now, this is a borough that does not publicly collect or share information of board members who have identify with immigrant status as well as disability status. So that information is missing there, but you see the underrepresentation when it comes to other demographics in terms of people who identify as Black, Asian, Hispanic, Latinx, and women board members. And again, we don't have a graph here for the demographics of policymakers. It is something that CORE is really pushing for our city to be able to collect and share so that way we're able to see the demographics of those folks who play a role as agency heads or play a role in making sure that certain policies are crafted for, like on the ground and on the table just as much that community has asked to see those disparities be closed. Next slide.
So moving on to the second indicator on the cost of living, we heard from over 4,000 community members in the first round of community conversations last year, and even now about their concerns about the rising cost of living in New York City. And we know that the impact of financial insecurity are felt more deeply by community members who have been historically underserved and harmed by ongoing racism and social injustice, which we can see echoed here at the top of the screen, this green bubble here. This is also reflected in CEP 13, where New Yorkers expressed that they would like to see an increase in access and lower costs to affording basic needs. Again, a concern that community members of all backgrounds have. And so to hold the city accountable in ensuring that families can afford to live, save, and thrive in New York City, CORE will track progress by measuring the cost of living, which again is defined as the percentage of the populations of New Yorkers who are receiving income under the New York City True Cost of Living, TCOL, by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability. This is to align with what is already defined in our New York City Charter, which you can see here on the screen in the bold section below. We just want to point out that the mayor is a year and a half late in releasing the New York City True Cost of Living, TCOL, that is mandated under our city charter. So in the interim, CORE will actually be tracking progress using the Urban Institute's True Cost of Economic Security, TCES. TCES is the threshold for economic security that families in New York City need to afford and save for the future, accounting for all costs, resources, and incomes. Next slide, please. And so taking a look at what we have at the from Urban Institute's TCES data, we found that a majority of New York City residents lack sufficient income and resources. You can see on this graph here that over 3/4, at nearly 88% of families in Bronx, they are living with income and resources under the TCES threshold. And in Brooklyn, that is over 2/3 of families. And in the rest of the other boroughs, Queens, Staten Island, and Manhattan, that is half of the families. These statistics are alarming and point to the need for the city to address the rising cost of living in New York City and the ways that the city can further support community members through policies and programs, just as community members again have voiced out in CEP 13. And again, we look forward to updating these results with the anticipated New York City True Cost of Living measure that will be released annually and will speak more specifically to community members' financial realities in New York City. Thank you. Next slide, please.
So our last indicator that we released today is titled Housing and Business Ownership. Community members have shared with us that they would like to see an increased access and affordability of both New York City properties and businesses in New York City. And again, on the side, we included quotes directly from community members during our engagement cycle. But we all know that ownership is connected to wealth, right? But many communities harmed by racism and social injustice don't have access to this. They experience several barriers to be able to close the racial wealth gap, which we know would improve their well-being across home, land, and business ownership opportunities. So CORE will be tracking the city's progress to implementing these changes by looking at the proportion of New York City residents with home ownership compared to the general New York City population with home ownership. And that again is by race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability, in addition to the proportion of New York City residents with business ownership compared to the general New York City population across the same demographic areas. Next slide. We really reiterate again the importance of consistent publicly available data. Unfortunately, no New York City agency is collecting and sharing data consistently that shows the demographics of home and business ownership within our city. So for the purpose of this indicator, we will be using the American Community Survey, which does provide some of this data, although limited in the ways in which that they collect information around gender identity and sexual orientation, which again, we would want to see this a little bit more disaggregated. In the collection of this information, they only ask about binary sex, which you'll notice in our graph here, you'll only see male and female. Which we know we want to see that data being broken down more just to be able to further understand these disparities. But the data that is available shows us clear gaps in both home and business ownership throughout New York City. You'll notice to the with the graph to the left that speaks to the New York City residents who own their home, people who identify as Hispanic and Latinx. Black and disabled residents are less likely to own their home. 32.7% of Black families and 19.5% of Hispanic and Latinx families own their homes, compared to 46.6% of white families. The data to your right, which shows the proportion of New York City residents who own their businesses. We measure business in terms of those who have like self-employment in their own incorporated business, professional practice, or farm. But we're noticing that that number is lower among non-white, female, and disabled residents, with rates as low as 1.1%, 1.4%, and 1.6% respectively. So again, across all of these, we are beginning this process, learning from the process, but really just going based off of data that will be released annually. And we'll open up for at least 2 questions now in relation to the outcome indicators.
Thank you so much, Maya and Stella. For anyone who has questions, please put your question in the chat and you can message any of the hosts. And we're going to take the first 2 questions. So Kathleen, if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat what your question is. Okay. And to do that, please go to the chat, click the plus button that says new chat, and chat to the host. And then you should be able to get to us. Thank you. Okay. If that does not work for you, you may come off of mute and ask your question. Kathleen, if that would be easier for you.
Yes,
Okay.
that would. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I can't type as fast as others at times. My question is, I know you talked about language access. Would that include also language access for people who are deaf or, have a hearing loss? Concerning like ASL and that?
Yes, thank you for the question. It is something that we are working to, one, get data on, but also to uplift through our community, especially in our second engagement cycle that has been coming up a lot. And we really do want to acknowledge that are people's, everyday realities. So we do want to learn more about it, but also ensure that ASL is seen as a priority language outside of just the top 10 priorities that the city is only acknowledging. So thank
Right.
you for the question.
And it wouldn't just be ASL. There may be other
Yes.
languages, sign languages that people could use. So we should consider that too. And I just, if you don't mind, another quick question. When you talk about home ownership, are you also looking at not only affordability, but accessibility? Because that is a big problem for people with disabilities, that, you have to buy a place and then you have to renovate it. There's nothing many times that are not accessible in affordable ranges. So I just like that to be considered. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And that is something that we've mentioned. It's accessibility, but also affordability, recognizing that, communities harmed by racism and social injustice do not receive loans as others, right? And that also plays a big role in the accessibility portion. So thank you.
Well, I'm not just talking about receiving loans. I mean, about being able to have a bathroom you can use in your home.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about,
Oh, I'm
physical.
sorry.
And also, I'm talking about physical. Yeah, see, it's not even on your radar. And that's a big problem for people who are disabled. I mean, even just getting into a building can become like, forget about it. I might as well live in Canada, you know. For to be able to even get into your home is a major difficulty. I mean, if you just walk around the neighborhoods and just see how many homes are truly accessible for people with disabilities, it's horrible. And I mean, if you're blind or you have hearing loss, I mean, there's so many things, there's so many obstacles for people, New Yorkers with disabilities. And then you have to also include the fact that many in our community can't even get jobs. So how are you going to even, like you said, how are you going to get a loan if you don't have a job? So thank you.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I defined accessibility different in that
That's okay.
context, but
This is good.
it's totally a reality. And I thank you so much for uplifting that and sharing with us.
And thank you for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate you.
We have time for one more question. Okay.
Okay, so another question that Malika, sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, Queno had asked, is there plans to disaggregate data based on language proficiency, measure language access, and also include highest education level?
So that is something that we should be acknowledging. Again, the issues with like the disaggregation is based on every city agency and everyone being involved in like standardizing the ways in which that they collect and share. And I'm not sure if we mentioned this at the top, like the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice is also responsible for releasing a standard for disaggregating data across the city. That work is also delayed. But I'd be happy to hear and also look into those ways of disaggregation. We've seen a lot of it in terms of how like other states and other entities are not even looking at like some of the ways in which we're uplifting, right? The multiple gender identities and things of that nature. But that is something that we can uplift and willing to learn more about. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. We'll take one last question from KJ and then we're gonna close this out and move on to the next section.
Sorry, that took a while. I'm wondering, I know that right now there's a lot of tracking of existing data and pushing city agencies to either collect or in the process of gathering data. We're also, raising a lot of issues and questions, and these things come to the fore. But I'm wondering if there are plans in the future, if we're talking about equity, just tracking what the city agencies are doing. It's a start, but I'm wondering if there are plans by CORE to do more, for lack of a better term, qualitative data collection, right? That is more from the community. It's really hard to capture the intersectionality of race, class, gender, and all those things. I mean, you can cross-tabulate, but the degrees. I mean, I have a lot of, thoughts around that, but I think that pipelining, we can track stuff. The data could be what we think is considered increase in a way that we want. But if we're really talking about inequity, that the education, access to education level, if we're just going by what exists and what the world considers um, legitimate, how do we also capture the other kinds of data that really keep this barrier and the inequity just kind of widening? I don't know if that makes sense. So the quickest way is that qualitative data and analysis.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyungji, for your question. Absolutely. We believe in the power of stories and narratives, particularly the ones from community members. And so our work is actually, I would say, mixed methods. So we both use both quantitative and qualitative. And for the indicator work, we actually did incorporate a qualitative portion through our surveys in assessing what community members think core could be tracking indicators. We actually had an open-ended response in our survey where community members actually were able to directly input what their thoughts in terms of what we could use as indicators. And then moving forward, we're actually launching focus groups with community members as well. And this is more of a specific project, really, again, understanding the financial realities, which is related to our second indicator, cost of living. And the findings that we hear from that will definitely further help us improve this indicator and find, I guess, more relevant and appropriate ways to measure what affordability and thriving means in New York City. And I also do want to point out that our community organizing and engagement team are constantly on the ground, engaging conversations with our community members through our community partners. And so I believe we have I think it's in the next slide, but we again have really been listening to community members, hearing what their needs are. And again, that's how our CEP, the Community Equity Priorities, came about. So we try our best to uplift all the time, all these members' concerns. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. And we always want to send our community members in the core of our work, and no pun intended. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We are going to move to the next section. So I'm excited to introduce our community organizing and engagement team that's been doing amazing work across the city. So I believe I'm going to pass it off to Marian to get us started.
Yes, you are. Hi. Next slide, Kayla, actually. Hello. So, my name is Marian. I use he, they pronouns. I am the Community Organizing and Engagement Associate here at CORE. So the Community Organizing and Engagement team, we are the team that goes into community. We partner with different organizations to create spaces for community members to hold government accountable to advancing racial equity and social justice in government decision-making. So when we're out on the ground, as Stella mentioned, we get to talk to New Yorkers from all 5 boroughs, and we're able to identify opportunities to uplift the lived experiences of New Yorkers in proposed solutions to inequity perpetuated by government. I see some of our partners are here. I'm glad to see y'all. So yeah, here are some photos. We are outside, we are at rallies, we table at various events and celebrations, we're at schools talking to the youths. So we're out here, and I'm gonna pass it off to Chris. I'm sorry, I'm gonna pass it off to Omawale. Next slide, Kayla.
That's all right, Marian. Thank you very much. I'm Omawale Adewale, and I'm the Senior Community Organizing and Engagement Associate. So NYC CORE says reparations now. Reparations now is a familiar slogan and long-time demand for reparations made popular by those affected by slavery. In October 2024, New York City passed historic legislation to establish a study on reparations and create the Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Plan to be implemented 2028. What has CORE done regarding reparations so far? On June 10th, 2025, CORE held the first ever citywide gathering on reparations by a city agency to develop community-informed values that will lead the future of this work. CORE organized 6 virtual general information sessions with 200 people in total to discuss local laws 91 and 92 related to reparations, receiving early feedback on how New York City CORE should design the project. CORE is developing a community engagement plan that will allow city resources to fund community groups to work with us to establish the reparations study and create the truth, healing, and reconciliation plan for New Yorkers affected by slavery, Jim Crow, and their impact on families today. Thank you. I will pass it over to my colleague, Chris.
Thank you, Omowale. Next slide. Thank you, Kayla. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris. I'm the Community Organizing and Engagement Associate for Youth Voice here at CORE. I use she, her, or all pronouns. So just to give you guys some more information about our CORE Organizing Network, right? So in May 2025, CORE launched its first ever CORE Organizing Network. And out of 133 applicants, we accepted 70 organizations into our network. So what is the network, right? Our community organizations that have demonstrated a commitment to advancing racial equity and social justice with community members to address their needs and to improve the city. They applied to host community conversations that will be funded by CORE. And then those who got accepted into the network, they're hosting community conversations for us to help us get input on our community equity priorities, our CEPs. So who is in our network? We have nonprofit organizations, advocacy groups, we have faith-based groups, mutual aid and volunteer-led groups, small businesses, small minority women-owned businesses. We have NYCHA tenant associations. We have arts and cultural organizations, youth groups, CUNYs, parent associations, NYCHA tenant associations, and the list goes on. What do the conversations look like, right? So our community partners, they usually host groups of 20 to 25 people, ages 11 plus, who have experienced racism or social injustice to share why it is important to them why it's important to them and what is important to them for government to work on to improve their well-being. So conversations are usually hosted both virtually or in person by our partners, and they're conducted in multiple languages. And at the end of these conversations, right, our partners get the opportunity to have our participants fill out the survey, which is how we gather our feedback from community and give input on these community equity priorities. And they also get an incentive at the end of each conversation as well. And I've seen these conversations happen in many different places. Our partners are very creative. So we've had conversations happen at schools, at CUNYs, dance studios, public spaces, community gardens, senior centers, and the list goes on. So I'm going to pass it back off to Marion just so we can take a deeper dive into our findings.
Next slide, Kayla. So far, this is basically our second community engagement cycle, and we have received 4,963 responses, which means we've overpassed the number of responses that we did in our first community engagement cycle, so we're really proud of that. These responses have come from a total of 122 community partners. We've held and our community partners have held 159 community conversations. And so far we have 19 upcoming. I see some hearts and some thumbs up from the partners who are hosting these conversations. So really happy to see that. We have 19 and more upcoming scheduled for the rest of the cycle. So what have we learned so far? So we are ranking the community equity priorities, or CEPs, which I will refer to them from here on out. So what community finds are the most urgent CEPs are number 13, which is about lowering the cost of basic needs, number 7, which is about making housing more affordable, and number 16, which is holding city workers accountable, those who abuse their powers accountable. And so for 13, I just wanted to share a few kind of stories. Someone mentioned qualitative data. So we have been hearing stories. And so, for example, for number 13, across all 5 boroughs, across all ages and races and different demographics, we are hearing that it is becoming too expensive to live in New York. Community has raised that the cost of public transportation is high and keeps increasing, while the MTA is becoming more unreliable. I was in a conversation in Queens, and seniors were sharing how they have to travel to Manhattan to reach their doctor's appointments and how costly that is, both monetarily and how much time that takes. And definitely the rising cost of food is on everyone's minds. Regarding CEP 7, which is about making housing more affordable, this is also definitely something that we hear across the board. We heard how much expensive housing is and how landlords are increasing rent, yet they aren't making repairs in apartments. Some community members are sharing how they're getting involved in local tenant unions and building tenant associations to get problems addressed. And in Brooklyn, I went to a conversation where there was a lively discussion about gentrification and how displacement of Black communities is a violent act that is systemically perpetuated by financial institutions, and the lack of government support to these communities is only making this displacement worse. And lastly, CEP 16, which is definitely the most agitating CEP, is about holding government workers accountable. Particularly, we've heard about the police department, ACS, and the HRA. We've heard from mothers whose children were killed by the police. They're sharing how they've been organizing for a decade already, and they just keep pushing to make this work push forward. We've heard from youths calling to remove police from their schools because oftentimes the police in schools target Black and brown kids, disabled kids, gay and trans kids. And so to summarize, these 3 CEPs are really agitating New Yorkers across all boroughs, ages, races, sexual identities, different disabilities. And these are what New Yorkers are finding most urgent that the government needs to address in order to close the racial equity gaps that exist in our city. And so far, that's what we have. And we'll open the floor up to, we'll take 2 questions.
Yes. Thank you so much, Marion. One quick note about the questions. I just wanted to note that we prior to had asked for questions to be in the chat, but I do understand now that that may be difficult for some, and it is not actually an inclusive practice. We do want to make sure that we are being inclusive at all times. So if you would like to say your question, please do raise your hand and we'd be happy to call on you. If you would like for us to read your question, then we're happy to do that as well. You would just send it in the chat. And Lupe Hernandez, I see your hand raised.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. Lupe Hernandez, she, her, ella pronouns, and I am one of the Education and Opportunity Community Organizers at the New York City Public Advocate's Office. I had a question regarding our school safety agents and the recent transition of the commissioner that they would be responding to, and just wondering if that's on NYCOR's, just raising that and to make sure that you guys are aware, and if there's, and maybe you guys have more information that what has been given to our office as well as community members in this regard, especially when you just raised that has been what we hear from young people in public schools is unfortunately that the SSA agents are, and to be able to remove them from the NYPD completely has been what they've been advocating for. However, it seems like we're going in the opposite direction of where NYCOR in reducing this racial equity gap in this regard with public schools.
Thank you so much for that question, Lupe. I'm just going to jump in really quickly, but then of course, COE, feel free to jump in. This was recently raised to us, but we have not yet taken up the issue only because this is, we are hearing some brand new developments out of NYPD and DOE. This is an issue we can certainly work on with partnership. So in partnership with our community organizations, we'd be more than happy to do that. We're going to share a little bit in the coming slides on what that partnership could look like. So it can be working on campaigns, it can be testifying in front of city council, it can be really supporting and building, helping organizations build capacity to do that work. As you said, young people are clear, they're strong, they're brilliant, and they have been leading racial equity and social justice change in New York City for decades. So we do want to make sure that any work that we do, one, comes out of community conversations, comes from young people themselves and our community partners, and is seen as an add to what they're asking for. So all of this is to say we can certainly work to pick that up. But as you know from your work, and everyone does here as well, there are so many racial equity issues, and we are still a staff of 13. So we do rely on our community partners to tell us what they would like to see CORE do. And we're happy to have those conversations at any time. Great. Are there any other questions for the COE team?
Hi there, I have a question. Thank you for the floor. My question is around how can the information from the community conversations that are happening live be captured, because more of it is being captured through the conversation than through the survey. So I am glad that Chris was able to make it to one of our last conversations. But the truth is, so much of them were so robust with information and feedback. And everybody's not always able to translate their thoughts, opinions, and ideas into the survey. It's almost like the gap that's created by students who are not able to take tests, or maybe not able to write their answers as clearly as they can articulate them. And so I think it'll be helpful if and I know you all are having a lot of conversations, but if people can, if you all can watch them, if you can listen to them, should they be streamed so that we can look back at it? Should they, do we need a note taker to kind of like encapsulate what the takeaways are? Can they be, submitted at your time after the note taker kind of like compiles all the takeaways? Something that can really pull from conversations, because so much more is happening and coming out from the conversations than what's getting captured in the survey.
Thank you so much for that. I feel pretty confident in saying that is everything that you listed is what we would love to do more of. I think so everyone at CORE, all of our team members, regardless of their role or responsibility in the office, attends community conversations, and all of our commissioners attend community conversations. But even with that, that's not enough people for the amount of conversations that are happening. So the recommendations that you offered are great. Because we are closing out, we're at the tail end of this one, we can include all of those recommendations for the next cycle and for all of our future conversations, regardless of the program. We absolutely want to hear what's coming up in the notes, like what's coming up in the open discussion. If it is possible to get notes, we would love that. Part of the reason why we have an open text box in the survey is for people to write any additional notes, anything that the survey is missing, any ideas that they have. It was through that process, an open text box, that we, in the first round, went from 16 equity priorities to 18 equity priorities, because people were saying, hey, you missed this, and we really need you to add it. So we want all of that information, and we would love to work with you to figure out how to get it. And we are going to be offering a debrief for all of our community partners to find out what do we need to do differently in the next round to make sure that we can capture all of that information. So thank you so much for raising it. Just want to reiterate, we want all the information, and we want to work with you to make sure that we get it. I do feel like this is also a good opportunity to note just that CORE is only 2 years old. And so we are learning as we go. Even today, we learned a lot about Zoom and a virtual briefing and assigned tasks. And more importantly for me, like Kathleen, being able to come off of mute and share your question, but also have staff members in the chat tell me that you need to say your question rather than type it. That in itself was a learning around inclusivity in our briefing. So we are learning every time, and we absolutely are going to be working to integrate all of our learnings. So thank you to everyone for being here. Please continue the recommendations. We will be offering a form at the end of this for you to share anything else that you want us to do or do differently, do more of or do less of, so that in our next year, we're really able to truly meet the needs. And also we hope next time everyone gets to bring a young person so that we can ensure that youth voices are here at the commission. We just one added note to Lupe's question. The Commission on Racial Equity was established to have commissioners representing voices of people under the age of 25. Because the Racial Justice Commission wanted to note in the charter how important youth voice is. So we do want to make sure that we are including them at all times. And also we ask all of you to bring the young people in your lives to this conversation so that we can have them in the space and they can share a bit of their brilliance, and hopefully it rubs off on us for the next round. So now we are going to move to our legal and legislative team. And so I'm going to pass it off to Rachel, who is our general counsel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Needleson. I'm, as I said, general counsel here at CORE. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the lawsuit that's currently pending against the city. So, Kayla, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. Okay, so what Marion and Chris and Omowale have been discussing, these community conversations, they're required by the city's charter, which directs CORE as the city's racial equity oversight body to review, evaluate, and monitor a biennial racial equity planning process that is informed by these community equity priorities. And because the city has failed to take the next step in this planning process, CORE has been prevented from performing its central duty and has petitioned to court to compel the city to comply with the terms of the charter. And before taking this step, CORE made repeated efforts to accommodate the city by agreeing to adjust the timeline for the racial equity planning cycle. So initially, back in April of 2024, given delays in staffing and appointments, CORE and the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which is responsible for developing and releasing the plan, agreed to postpone the release of the preliminary plan to October 31st of 2024 and the final plan to the end of that, that December. Then later a few months later in November of 2024, the city committed, couldn't make the initial that deadline, but instead committed to release the preliminary plan in February 2025 and the final plan in May of 2025. Then in February, unfortunately, no plan was forthcoming, and MOERJ, which is the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, posted a preliminary and final plan release dates of March and June 2025 on its website. And after that, CORE issued a demand letter to the mayor's office, and in response, the city's Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiatives reported that the plan, this was back in March, as I say, March of 2025, that the plan was under review by the city's law department, and it's our understanding that that is still what they maintain. And when the city failed to release the plan by that point, CORE notified the city's law department of its intent to initiate legal action. Because the law department departed from its standard practice of approving payment for conflict counsel, because when one city entity brings a case against another, the city's law department is conflicted out of providing representation. But because the law department did not authorize, again, paid outside counsel, CORE was obligated to identify a pro bono provider, and then ultimately filed suit in August. So in terms of what happens next, the city is expected to submit a response to that petition that was filed in August. So that response is due not too long from now, on October 10th, and then the parties are scheduled to appear in court on October 21st. And let's see, and I should also just, I imagine people are wondering, what, if anything, the impact of, the current election will have on the lawsuit, and just sort of recent developments in terms of the current mayor, withdrawing from the pool of candidates. So, so just to clarify, the lawsuit actually seeks to compel the city's mayor to release the inaugural racial equity plan as required by law, regardless of who that mayor may be. So the hope is that whoever is the next mayor of the city will in fact take the initiative and release the racial equity plan as required by law, and then ideally that would be an end to it. But we will, the lawsuit will remain in place until that happens. So I should now say that in addition to overseeing the city's racial equity planning process, CORE is charged with partnering with other city agencies on special projects and liaising with city council on legislation. And so my colleague Cairo is now going to discuss that work. And Kayla, if you don't mind just moving on to the next slide.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you, Rachel. My name is Cairo Gishoro. I'm the Senior Legislative Strategist here at CORE. Pronouns are he, him. And I am now going to be talking a little bit about the legislative initiatives that we've had so far, as well as some of the things that we've been doing with the City Council. And so in keeping up with our mandate of raising community voices in New York City government operations, as well as policies, as our chair, Linda Tijani, mentioned, we were able to work with one of our community partners, Narrowing the Front Door, and work in drafting a resolution, resolution number 935, 2025, which is the year that it was introduced. And I just want to take a minute to shout out Councilmember Althea Stevens, who is the prime sponsor of this resolution and has worked really closely with us to get this through the City Council. And so that resolution really just calls on New York City to recognize the institutional and systemic racism and the generations of harm that have been embedded in today's child protective services system, such as the Administration of Children's Services, which is ACS. Now, just to sum up the resolution, we have 3 bullet points. One is that ACS's current institutional and structural framework is essentially rooted in anti-Blackness. And so we recognize the history of racism when it comes to Black children and Black families in terms of the separations that happen. And that framework essentially laid some of the policies that we see today. And we also recognize that it has continued to harm and have a negative impact on the lives of Latinx families. Secondly, government separation of Black and Latinx children from their parents has continued to increase the likelihood of poor outcomes across every indicator of well-being, such as cognitive and behavioral development, mental and physical health, educational attainment, and income earnings. And finally, We recognize that ACS has to change its policies and procedures that have essentially been punitive to policies that increase the types of support necessary for Black and Latinx children and families to thrive. And I also want to point out that we also testified at the City Council's Committee on Public Safety's oversight hearing that was titled NYPD Discipline and the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Once again, it was our chair, Linda Tijani, who was at the helm, and these were just some of the points that she raised during the hearing. So one was to ensure that the NYPD is going to develop a discipline matrix that is not only transparent, but is agreed to by survivors of police violence, family members who have lost loved ones to police violence, and communities harmed by racism and social justice. We also wanted to ensure that the NYPD was going to address its systemic non-compliance with turning over footage and information to existing oversight bodies such as the CCRB to ensure timely and complete investigations into police misconduct. And finally, was to conduct an anti-racist review of 9/11 scripts to ensure that racial bias and bias against people experiencing mental health episodes leads to a trauma-informed response. So that's it from my end. I think we're going to have a couple of questions from folks. So Kayla, and I will turn it back to Linda.
Thank you so much. Please feel great, Kathleen.
Yes. Do we have an index number for the lawsuit? And am I correct? It would be in the Supreme Court, New York County. And is this a summary proceeding? Because you talked about a petition as opposed to a complaint.
It's an Article 78 petition, and I can put the let's see, I can put a link to the relevant documents.
And have you thought of asking the Campaign Finance Board to include a question at the debates of the mayor concerning these issues about them releasing this information? You know, that they were, each of the candidates, what's their position? Because that would be really helpful, I think, for us as voters to know and have them put it actually out there. So later on, they can't roll back on it on a TV recording.
I think that's a terrific idea. I think
Yeah,
I think it should have been done already.
Yeah, I don't know if maybe it already has, but if it hasn't, if you could reach out to the Campaign Finance Board and get that done. And maybe even ask it of all the candidates, not just the mayors, but also like the ones that are running for the controller and the public advocate, because public advocate could take over if something happens to the mayor and the controller, because they're the money source. So those three. But thank you. And yeah, if you can just put that, and that would be Supreme Court, New York County, correct?
That's right.
And would there be any type of rally outside beforehand? I was wondering, on the 21st.
We did have a rally and press release when, back in August when when the suit was filed. So I suppose I'll have to leave that to to our chair and the commissioners. I can't speak to plans right now for further rallies, but yeah, that is something we did initially.
Thank you so much for both of those recommendations, Kathleen. I think we absolutely are going to have another rally. We just want to make sure that it's timed properly to have the greatest impact on the case. So we will be reaching out to community to share when and where, but we absolutely will be bringing people together again. And we do want every mayoral candidate and every candidate to know about the racial equity plan, to be pushing the racial equity plan. We did get a lot of support from City Council that were asking the mayor for the racial equity plan. There were hearings on this. Councilmember Natasha Williams, who's the chair of Civil and Human Rights Committee, has done an extensive amount of work to really push the mayor's team to release this plan. And so also just want to acknowledge her and her hard work, as well as several members of City Council. Over 28 members penned a letter to City Hall demanding the release of the plan. So did the public advocate. We also had the controller at our announcement of the lawsuit. So we do greatly appreciate the support, and we want to make sure that all of New York City leadership knows that the racial equity plans are written into the law for the future of New York City. It has to be done every 2 years. Everyone should know about this. Everyone should be involved and be asking. All 45 city agencies are implicated in this plan. So just thank you so much for your recommendations, because I think it will help to go a long way as we make sure that it comes up in this cycle and all future cycles. And we're going to go next to Tyler James, and then that'll be our last question for this section.
Thank you. I just had a question regarding the resolution that was just discussed involving ACS. I was just wondering if there was any updates regarding that resolution. And also, I noted that it points out Child Protective Services, but I wonder if it just applies to all the services provided by the institution, or is this the focus on child welfare investigations?
Thank you, James. First, I'll answer your first question first, which is with regard to any updates. We are hoping at least that we'll be, Councilmember Stevens is going to be scheduling hearings sometime this month. So that is the next step in this process, which is to go ahead, have a hearing. And we're hoping that we'll have as many community partners come in and testify just to some of the, destructive effects of the child welfare system. In terms of the, whether we're targeting all aspects of the of ACS's policies, which certainly taking a very broad look at some of the things that have gone on. And what is also happening is that we're having many of the community partners, narrowing the front door included, we're speaking to some of these issues, particularly with folks who have had personal experience with their dealings with ACS. We're also looking at a lot of policy papers to inform some of the things that have been going on to kind of get a full-scale understanding of, what exactly are the policies that we should be targeting going into the future. I'll also let Linda come in on this because I'm sure she'd like to add a couple more things.
Thank you. I do want to just quickly uplift that this work started with narrowing the front door. This was their idea. This is their recommendation. This is a great example of how we partner with community organizations. Narrowing the Front Door is an organization in New York City that has been doing an extensive amount of work on literally its name, narrowing the front door to the child welfare system, and really understanding the role of race and racism and its impact on Black and Latino families. There is no current child welfare policy that will go unexamined. Everything will be examined, from looking at how our child welfare contracts created and distributed, to how our investigations moving through the process, and what needs to get done to really remove racial bias from this system. We also want to acknowledge that it is not only ACS, that the child welfare system is actually encompassing of many city agencies, and that many city agencies have mandated reporters and participate in the process of family investigations and separations. And every single government agency is responsible for the well-being of our children and our families. It doesn't matter if you're Department of Transportation, if you're Department of Buildings, or if you're a Department of Education. Youth and children show up in every single part of the city. They must be respected and cared for by every single agency in the city. And so narrowing the front door is actually at the forefront of doing this work, and they are a coalition of organizations. And so this resolution really comes from them and their work, and we worked in close partnership with them. So again, this is every single policy and practice related to children and family well-being, and that certainly centers ACS, but is encompassing of all of our city agencies as we seek to create a city where all children are able to thrive.
And I'll just chime in very quickly because I want to say hello, Tyler, and also, as Linda mentioned, this resolution, the origin or sort of the inspiration from it was the recommendations that actually, came out of the Narrowing the Front Doors 2022 report. So Commissioner Dan Hauser was one of the authors of that report, and the first recommendation that came out of it was to the mayor and New York City leadership to acknowledge the harm that the system has done, and initially the thought was perhaps through an executive order, and ultimately we thought it would be, well, really the task force thought it would be more meaningful if it were done as a city council resolution that could sort of raise, as Linda mentioned, the roles of kind of different city agencies in terms of providing supports to families and interventions that ideally would prevent families from being separated.
Thank you.
so much. Okay, so let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you to all the presenters, my colleagues who've presented so far. My name is Kayla Parker. I'm the Communications Associate at CORE. And I just like to say that you all should stay involved in what's next with CORE. So here are a few next steps that NYC CORE will be taking in the next few months. So we're going to release the first progress report for reparations, truth, healing, and reconciliation. We're also going to launch a reparations, truth, and healing network. And we're also going to analyze and report on the second round of community engagement cycle updates. And just to make sure that everybody can stay in touch with us, please sign on, please scan the QR code for our Instagram, as well as our newsletter. And just a quick FYI for the newsletter QR code, when you do scan it, it'll take you to our landing page, our homepage on our website. If you scroll down, you'll see sign up for updates, and that way you could sign up and we'll get an email and add you to the newsletter list. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and I'll let Linda take it away.
Great, thank you. First off, thank you for the additional 25 minutes. We did go over, and we appreciate you staying on. We have a quick evaluation survey for you to complete. Pablo, if you wouldn't mind putting that in there, thank you. So we've added both our community equity priority response form. If you have not gotten a chance to tell us what you think about our 18 community equity priorities and how urgent these are for you, please do fill out the form. And we have an evaluation form for today's session. We have learned a lot about how to do a virtual briefing. We would not have been able to learn this without you. And so thank you so much for engaging in the chat, for coming off of mute and sharing your questions, and for sharing your recommendations. This is the first of many. We will be doing some of these in person as well, so that you can get to meet the team. And just also wanted to acknowledge and thank all of our presenters for their hard work. The indicators have been a year in the making, so I am so glad that our research and policy team is going to get a break from indicators as you all go take a look at our wonderful website that they have also been working to launch for today's session. I know we did put the links in the chat. Please visit the CORE website. But we also have some other staff that didn't get to introduce themselves, and so I just wanted to make sure that we thank them as well. Avery and Pablo. We also have Sabani on the line with us. Kayla did get a chance to introduce herself, which is great. But essentially, in addition to our front-facing staff, we have an operations team. We would not have been able to do this without them, as well as staff who unfortunately are no longer with CORE, but had an immense impact on our work, Isis and Lorenzo and Tiana. So thank you, everyone. And thank you to our commissioners. We're excited to continue the work with all of you. Thank you to Wesley, who is also a new staff member as our EEO officer. Even though we are an independent commission, we do have to be in compliance with all of our local laws. And Wesley helps us get that done. So thank you to everyone in our operations team, everyone on our community organizing and our research and our communications team, our commissioners, and most importantly, thank you to our partners. We would not be able to do this without you. And we look forward to having you join us at the next rally when we talk about our lawsuit and hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully our win to ensure that every single mayor in New York City understands that racial equity is the law, and we are here to make sure that they do it. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Nice to see you, Ms. Daniels.
Yes, it will be nice. It's nice to finally put a face to the name. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Kayla, can you